The 16-year-old suspect in a brutal double homicide has just been charged with murder, but in juvenile court. Could that change? Could he be charged as an adult? What would that mean? And we just learned new chilling alleged details from authorities that could change everything for this defendant. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. We have an update in a story that we've been following since the beginning. A 16-year-old, 16, has now been officially charged with murder in juvenile court for the killings of 44-year-old mother Jessica Lyman and her 8-year-old son Eli Painter. This is out in Saratoga Springs, Utah. This currently unidentified teenager, because of his age, is facing 2 counts of aggravated murder, a first-degree felony, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. This is a second-degree felony. And before we even get into the legal ramifications, the complications of what this means, let me just lay out for you this brutal scenario as told by authorities. And I will tell you, we actually have an affidavit that is going to lay out these alleged details, and this is significant, we have just learned frightening new allegations that could change everything for this case. And then I'm going to bring in acclaimed Utah criminal defense attorney Skye Lazaro to understand what it means for this defendant to be charged criminally in juvenile court. What does this mean for a trial, an evidence, potential sentence? Could this go? Because I want to understand the intricacies of Utah law. And to be clear, we're talking all about this, and I'm about to lay out these allegations and these new alleged details, even though the defendant is innocent unless proven guilty, okay? Let's talk about it. So, we have this affidavit for a search warrant for records and data that are associated with a Vivint security account for who appears to be Eli's father, electronic information, location information associated with seemingly a device or devices. And it reads, quote, on March 28th, 2025, at approximately 10:11 a.m., officers with Saratoga Springs were dispatched to the address of a female had called 911 and reported that she had discovered 2 individuals unconscious and covered in blood at the above address. I have listened to the 911 call and heard the following. The caller, later identified as Lyman's daughter, Eli's sister, reported that she entered the above residence that morning after spending the night at her father's home in Cedar Hills and discovered her mother, later identified as Jessica Lyman, and younger brother, later identified as Eli Painter, lying in a bed, unconscious and bleeding from their heads. She also reported that the suspect, so then 15 years old, might also be at the residence. And yes, this 15-year-old, this then 15-year-old, currently 16-year-old, is Jessica's son. Horrifying. So the affidavit goes on to say that officers arrive, they find, quote, Jessica and Eli lying next to each other on a bed in the master bedroom. From the foot of the bed, Jessica was lying on the right side of the bed and Eli was on the left. Both had blood on and about their heads and faces, and blood was pooling on the bed below each one of their heads. Both appeared to have been shot in the head with small caliber round. Now, this is significant. A, state of the bodies when they're found gives you a timeline of when the shooting happened. The circumstances in which they were seemingly shot to death in the head, you can make the argument from prosecutors that this was intentional, right? That this was confined to a certain area. Now, the affidavit goes on to say that Eli apparently had no pulse, that he was cold to the touch, that rigor mortis had set in, that Jessica's, quote, shorts or pants were down around her knees, that authorities would later discover that her underwear was pulled down around her knees too. They also say that she gasped for a breath, that her eyes rolled into the back of her head. So one of the officers initiates CPR, EMS arrives, they initiate life-saving measures. She's transported to the Utah Valley Regional Medical Center, but in the end, Eli was apparently pronounced dead at the scene, and Jessica died 3 days later on March 31st. The officers start clearing the house, and that is when they find this 15-year-old suspect exit a bedroom door and enter the hallway. They sit him down, and he apparently asks what had happened, asks multiple times, claims he was in his room taking a nap, claims he didn't hear anything. And when asked, this is key, when asked if any weapons were in the house, he apparently said he wasn't aware of any guns inside the home. Now that's interesting, considering you think about the two victims here who were shot, and according to the affidavit, no one had told him at that point that anyone had been shot. Why is he mentioning guns? Now, a defense attorney can make the argument, you say weapons, quick association, guns. They search the home. They find two .22 caliber shell casings were found inside the master bedroom. The technicians find what is believed to be seminal fluid on the bed. During the initial search, they also find apparently sex toys and fishnet stockings, both in Jessica's room and this then 15-year-old's room. They also apparently find panties in his room. Authorities also located in his room, quote, an empty Pilsner can in a dresser drawer, 2 BB pistols, plate carriers, and magazine pouches, and a, quote, handwritten note referencing several forms of forensic evidence. Specifically, the note mentioned serology, DNA, and firearm testing. Additionally, detectives located a note where this 15-year-old indicated that he wanted to kill himself. KUTV2 reported that this note said, quote, this is a murder story. You could see why this would be significant for prosecutors. I also don't want to get too graphic here, but apparently authorities also found what could be evidence of sexual contact on Jessica. Let's put it that way. So authorities take this teen to the police department, and this is where, when according to them, he kept asking for his cell phone, even to the point where his father, who was there, snapped at him and said, stop worrying about your phone. And this led authorities to believe that the phone could tell them when he was awake or the timeline of the shootings, right? Because the phone could tell if someone's been active on it. Later on in the affidavit, it explains how officers collected multiple videos from nearby residences between 2 and 3 a.m., okay? The video shows a suspicious individual who appears to be wearing a black and white mask, a dark hoodie, shorts, long black socks, and possibly slip-on shoes or sliders. This individual appears to be walking through the neighborhood while clearly trying to avoid motion-activated Ring doorbell cameras. The suspicious person is seen walking into the breezeway immediately north of the residence where the incident occurred. In one of the first videos where the suspicious person is observed, it appears as if the individual is wearing a backpack. Why is that significant? Well, later on April 13th, 2025, according to the affidavit, a couple that was walking their dog in the area find a backpack. They call police. Quote, Officer Sorensen found the backpack was located in reeds a few feet from a walkway through a riverfront park area that is accessible to the public. Officer Sorensen did not observe anyone who appeared to be looking for the backpack while she was there and suspected that the backpack was abandoned or had been discarded there. Looking inside the backpack, Officer Sorensen saw what she thought was a dark hoodie and rubber gardening gloves. Officer Sorensen noted a red dried substance on the gloves that she believed could possibly be dried blood. Detective Morgan also observed a red, rust-colored dried substance on the rubber gardening gloves that could possibly be dried blood. He observed that there was also a black beanie-style hat, a small flashlight, a headlamp, and a black neck gator-style face mask that had a partial white skull jaw printed on it. Upon more closely inspecting the contents of the backpack as well as the backpack itself, he noticed that it appeared to have a large amount of animal hair throughout the backpack and on many of the items. This animal hair was similar to the cat and dog hair that was found throughout the residence where the homicide occurred. Furthermore, the black beanie-style hat also contained what appeared to be human hair on the inside of the hat. The mask also appears consistent with and/or looks similar to the mask worn by the suspicious male seen on Ring doorbell videos walking through the neighborhood on the morning of March 28, 2025. On April 23, 2025, detectives served an additional search warrant at the residence where the homicides occurred and found and seized several pieces of evidence. One piece of evidence was a single right-footed black Nike slide slipper. Detectives have observed the 15-year-old wearing these shoes in multiple pictures found on his phone, and they appear similar to the shoes worn by the masked suspect seen walking through the neighborhood on various doorbell cameras. Detectives believe that the 15-year-old and/or a family member might have removed the matching left shoe. Going back to the suspect, the affidavit states, quote, "Through search warrants obtained for his Discord activity, we have learned that he has access to an old Samsung tablet that he is using to communicate with friends through the Discord app. Furthermore, detectives have learned that he has communicated with friends and discussed the homicides with his online friends. Detectives also found several photographs taken by him of him holding a black Glock 9mm handgun in his bedroom at Mike's house," I think this is the father's house, "during the period of time when he was living at Mike's house. Detectives believe that this clearly shows that he had access to firearms." Now, something else. It is being reported by ABC4 that the suspect, now 16 years old, was examined by police, that they determined he had scratches on his right shoulder, that his DNA was found under one of the victim's fingernails. Now, a defense attorney could say, hey, they live together, it's not unusual. But also, the outlet is reporting that his DNA was also allegedly found on the shorts that Jessica Lyman was wearing. We've talked about that before too. That the seminal fluid found on the bed, which we mentioned before, allegedly contained this suspect's DNA. The outlet also reports that gunshot residue, GSR, was found on multiple items of clothing associated with the suspect. And then there's this, according to the outlet, that home surveillance footage from a nearby home captures an argument or altercation on March 27th with a woman potentially consistent with Lyman's voice screaming this 16-year-old's name and saying, "What are you doing?" And that less than 2 minutes later, you can hear 3 gunshots. Authorities believe that the person in that video that I mentioned before matches the make and build of the suspect. Court documents saying, quote, "Based on the path of travel in the surveillance video, as well as time periods where the masked figure is not visible, the 16-year-old could have disposed of the murder weapon in several locations, including the Jordan River, which is only a few minutes walk from the home." ABC4 News reporting that the suspect admitted to police he had an argument with Jessica Lyman that night. And then I got to talk about the text messages. On April 2nd, police apparently got some critical evidence from a forensic download of Jessica's phone. And they found a text message exchange or exchanges between Jessica and her teenage son from the summer before, so July 2024. Many of these messages are just too vulgar to repeat here, but I'll give you an idea. Here are a few. Quote, "I don't like you, go away. Do you need to learn how to shut your mouth? You're so bleeping mentally ill. Do you know how insignificant you really are to my life? Very insignificant. I wish I died in your stomach. Wouldn't have to put up with you." And this teenage suspect was ultimately arrested on August 14th. And now we have this development that I mentioned at the top regarding the charges. However, I will tell you, according to the New York Post, the prosecutors in this case say that it is, quote, "the state's intention in filing this criminal information to bind the defendant over to the adult district court." So let me bring in Utah criminal defense attorney Skye Lazaro to talk about this. Skye, thank you so much for taking the time. This is an awful, awful case. There's a lot of components on it, but I want to start with what this whole juvenile adult court issue, because I think it's pretty significant. So how does it work in Utah whether this case will remain in juvenile court or adult court?
First of all, good morning, Jesse. This is a terrible, terrible case. Utah has a separate juvenile court for minors who commit even very serious offenses. As of right now, this kid is charged in juvenile court with murder and a number of other charges. It's really up to the district attorney's office whether or not they want to try to certify that to a district court. We do have a statute here in Utah that allows prosecutors to apply for a certification in really probably the most terrible of juvenile cases to try those people as adults. There's a number of factors that go into it. The district attorney's office here said they anticipate doing that, although I'm not sure if those filings have been submitted to the court yet.
What would be the rationale from a defense attorney or the court to say, you know what, I hear what you want, prosecutors. I know you want to certify this to district court, and we'll talk about why they may want that. But what would be the reasons they would say, no, this needs to remain in juvenile court?
There's a number of things I think his defense team is going to lean on and a court will consider as to whether or not this case should remain in juvenile court or be certified over. One of those is age. If the closer a person gets in age to 18, the more likely it is that something on a very serious nature will get certified. The other thing they're going to look at is mental health issues, whether or not, or developmental issues. Um, Kind of where this kid is at developmentally, both mentally, education, those types of things. Uh, because you don't, juvenile court has a way of really it's geared towards rehabilitation more than it is geared towards being punitive, especially here in Utah. And so once we get into state court with charges like these, these are potential life in prison if he's convicted of any of these first degree felonies. So I would think what we're going to see is a lot of information or a lot of filings, probably under seal. And if they're in juvenile court, we won't see them at all, dealing with his mental abilities, developmental abilities, anything sort of pointing towards those types of mitigating factors.
Yeah, let's just focus on this a second. What is the difference between adult court and juvenile court? Let's start in terms of the punishment. You talked to being more rehabilitative. Are you saying somebody who could be charged with murder in juvenile court, is there a possibility that they wouldn't spend the rest of their life incarcerated? How does it work in terms of the potential punishments?
So juvenile court only has jurisdiction over an individual until they turn 21. There are certain instances where they can keep them a little longer, or certain cases where then they may be transferred over to like a state prison system. But for the most part, most people aren't incarcerated in juvenile court, even in serious cases. They may do some time in some sort of secure care facility, but it's really geared towards being driven by juvenile probation, providing services to kids, services to families, education, treatment, those types of things to help get kids back on track. So that's why these cases where someone's charged with murder and they're juvenile are so difficult, is the juvenile court only has jurisdiction for so long over an individual, and then they really could only keep them in secure care up until I think it's 25, and then they have to release them.
So now you're seeing for our audience why it's so significant, whether it's juvenile
Hmm.
or adult court. Second question: are the trials different? If a trial happens in juvenile court, is it different than an adult court? Is there a jury when it comes to juvenile court? Is it only in front of the judge? Is the evidence different with how it could be presented? Are they two completely separate criminal proceedings?
And they are completely separate and completely different. Juvenile court is a bench trial before a judge. They still have the same burden of proof, but actually they don't make guilt findings. They just call them, findings essentially of what happened. Versus, and you don't have the option of having a jury trial in juvenile court. It's a closed proceeding. It's not open to the public. Everything is sealed. Like nothing is available to the public essentially that happens in juvenile court. Versus when we look at adult criminal court, we're seeing, these trials that are being live streamed as they're happening. Everything is open to the public. You have a jury, or you can elect a jury or a bench trial. So they're very, very different. The rules of evidence are largely the same, but the juvenile court has its own body of administrative governance as well. So there's rules that apply in juvenile court proceedings that may not apply or apply differently in adult court proceedings.
Now, if this does get certified and goes to adult court, what exactly could be the punishment here? I saw 25 years to life in prison. Correct me if I'm wrong on that with these charges. But also, is the death penalty a possibility here?
He is charged with aggravated murder. So, yes. But the state has not elected to seek that yet. We're not quite to that point. So, I guess procedurally, what needs to happen is they need to decide whether or not they're going to stay in juvenile court or adult court. If they stay in juvenile court, the juvenile court guidelines will decide what the sentence can be, and it won't be 25 years to life. If it gets certified to the district court, he's going to have this individual has the right to have a preliminary hearing. And after that preliminary hearing, which is our probable cause hearing, because we don't have grand juries in Utah in state court, then the prosecution can elect whether or not they intend to seek the death penalty in this case. So it's not off the table. I think it's highly unlikely, especially somebody of this age, for the state to do that, but it is a possibility.
So now let me ask you, before we get into the evidence and how you would potentially defend a case like this, in your experience, looking at what you see so far, do you think it's likely this is going to be certified and moved to adult court?
Given what we know, which is very, very limited right now, I think there's a possibility, or a pretty good possibility, that this case could get certified to the district court. Like I said, we're not privy to this kid's mental health records or what was going on in the home, or other mitigating factors that would, lead a court to want to keep this in the juvenile court proceedings for those types of reasons. But given what's been put out there, and what information we have, I could see this being certified.
Okay, so now let me ask you about a defense here. He is innocent unless proven guilty.
Mm-hmm.
But I just laid out in my intro all the alleged evidence that they seem to have right now against him. And gunshot residue, notes in the room, text messages, surveillance footage, forensic material, alleged communications, eyewitness testimony. It feels like a lot. If you were defending this case, where do you begin? Does the first thing you try to do is to make sure some evidence doesn't even get into trial in the first place? And what evidence would that be? What arguments would you even make?
I think with every case, you start there. You take a really close look at the procedural analysis of all the evidence collected in the case. How is it collected? How is it stored? How is it tested? All of the things that you can pick apart from just a pure procedural. They didn't follow the rules standard. They didn't follow the rules on a search warrant, things like that. So there's always arguments to be made there. Assuming, and that takes some time. Do we need to retest things? Are there other things that need to happen in this case? Assuming all of that is not problematic, and it's coming in, I think this is probably one of those cases where you start looking at a mitigation type defense. How do I get my client through this if I can't keep any of this evidence out? Because the evidence, the way they've stacked it up, at least in the probable cause statement they filed, which, I mean, we all know those are all of their greatest hits. They're not going to put anything in there that's detrimental to their case. It's going to be their strongest evidence, right, that they have right now. So assuming that all of that is true and you can't challenge it or you can't keep it out, I really think this becomes a mitigation case where you really have to start looking at this kid and what can you do to get him through this process and still come out the other side without spending the rest of his life in prison.
Do you mean mitigation, making it from murder to a lesser charge, like a manslaughter charge? Do you mean a mental health defense in some way?
Probably. That's a possibility. Like I said, we don't know a lot about this kid, but if I were defending this kid, that while I was looking at all the other procedural aspects of the forensic part of the investigation, I'd start doing a deep dive on him, getting his history, his mental health records, probably having new assessments done, hiring experts to take a look at him to see if there was something else going on. Because, this type of behavior it's not normal, right? Despite, for whatever reason, it happened. And I'm assuming we're saying assuming it's him. He is presumed innocent, but assuming it's him, the type of behavior displayed is not normal. Where he's just hanging out in the house with it. That's not typical behavior of a kid, even a kid who gets themselves in trouble or does something terrible. So I think there's probably a lot to look at there in terms of a mental health defense. This kid was probably struggling. They provided a snapshot of some text message conversations between him and his mom that were highly charged. So there was, I think, a lot going on there that you could dig into to try to maybe get either these charges reduced or some sort of reduction on a sentence.
I think the two things that stand out to me since the last time we talked about it, because we could talk about when he was found in the house and the GSR, but the notes in the room, the text messages. But I think that this new revelation about this audio, right, the surveillance footage capturing this audio of a woman who, arguably could be Miss Lyman, saying, "What are you doing?" saying his name, and then the gunshots right after. You couple that with some of this forensic material that has been linked back to him. I think that this is why I think it's a strong case from the prosecution. But I don't know. To me, that seems the part that there's one aspect to say, well, how do you know that's really him in the surveillance footage? Make and build the same. The backpack. They tried to link the backpack back to the room. But I think it's that audio that is going to be really, really strong for the prosecution. Do you agree?
I do. I think the audio is going to be hard to overcome, especially like you highlighted where she says his name. It's clearly there's something going on at that time, and then we hear the gunshot shortly thereafter. That's going to be, some of this is circumstantial evidence, that
Yeah.
the surveillance video and what juries want to make of that. But anytime you have a video or an audio captured in real time of what's happening, and you have the defendant identified on the video, you hear their voice, or they say something, or somebody says something to them or calls them by name, that's usually really strong evidence, and it's really hard to combat that evidence and to counter it or to come up with some sort of other explanation, because he said in his statement, he said he was sleeping and he didn't hear anything. And so, his mom yelling at somebody else, there's arguments to be made there. But it seems, at least the way it's presented, that I think that is probably fairly strong evidence for the state.
And I'm sure the defense would say, how do you know that's really her voice? How do you know it's about that? I also thought the comment from a responding officer that when they asked him, or allegedly asked him, are there any weapons in the house? He goes, there's no guns. And they didn't even know, they didn't say anything that there were gunshots, wounds, or anything like that. You could see it building. So look, we're going to follow this one. We've already been following it. This is a significant development. Skye Lazaro, thank you so much for taking the time. It's always good seeing you, and I always appreciate your insight on these cases.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. See you next time, everybody.